All right, now, everybody. Quiet, listen to me. We're going to start a show. Now, some of you people have been with me before. You know it's going to be a tough grind, but we're going to have a show.
I love Mondays. I know I'm not a popular position, but I love Mondays.
I love Tesla.
Oh, and I love Tesla.
I love Tesla.
I know. It's so exciting. I'm presiding over this madness today. I am Mark, you know, my distinguished colleague, Kim.
Kim, how are you?
And Tony is with us as well. And Tony is managing all the technical stuff.
Thanks,
We've
Tony.
got a lot of stuff to squeeze into the first hour. We'll do some politics. The politics of America having changed radically. Essentially, Donald Trump, very strong leader with the strength of the bully pulpit. He puts the bully in the bully pulpit, and he is threatening many of the senators who continue to modify, change, and otherwise alter his bill as it sits in the Senate. We'll probably get it through, then it has to go back to the House. So there's some lifting still to be done on this bill. We'll talk about that. Also, some controversial comments about Iran, and we'll get into those and share those with you. I have stories from the world of ice. Gary Dietrich joins. Also today, we revisit with one of the world's leading logistics experts when it comes to shipping, when it comes to supply chains, when it comes to tariffs and economics and world economics and the effect of world economics on those things like the supply chain, like inflation, like American economy. Jonathan Rosenthal will join us in the second hour. He is a brilliant mind, and he boils things down so beautifully. Can't wait to get into that conversation as well. And then we have a third conversation, do we not, Kim? What's the third conversation today?
I'm so excited about this conversation. This is a history of humans on drugs, and it goes through this new book by Sam Kelly, goes through some of the most notable figures in history and talks about how they were all doped up.
Everybody was on drugs, wasn't it? I've got the book right here. It's crazy.
Human history on drugs. And you wouldn't believe some of the people. You're thinking they were on drugs. Now it all makes so much more sense.
I mean, we go, it's and the book is really fun. So what is it, Tony? What's the problem?
I understand that's like the root of human civilization. The first thing cities came out of were places to get drunk and let me introduce you to my God, you know?
That's right. While you're stoned, let me introduce you to,
Where my weed smokers at?
Yeah. It wasn't even just weed. I mean, he gets into a bunch of stuff. It was really, it's pretty crazy.
Thanks, Tony.
Anyway, let's get into a couple of conversations. I will slide. Oh, Edgar Allan Poe was that? Well, you know, Edgar Allan Poe and wasn't Sherlock Holmes who was the protagonist in all those Sir Arthur Conan Doyle stories? Yeah, there it is. Sherlock Holmes is all doped up. Wow, great minds, Nullifidian and myself. Terrific, really something. I am going to before I start, I have to have my sip of a Coachella Valley coffee, and Coachella Valley coffee is. I know. It's delayed heart. We just took a mug and we just slapped one of our Mark Thompson Show stickers on it. That's all this is. But
It sounds like a Monday harp is what it sounds like.
Oh, it is delish, baby girl. I'm telling you what. CoachellaValleyCoffee.com is the official coffee of the show, and that it's the best coffee I've ever tasted. But there are teas and spices, and when you go in there, there's tasting notes on all of it. It's a boutique roastery, so everything there is hand roasted and personally curated by Cliff and the crew at Coachella Valley Coffee. You can see it all there. But I just want to mention it quickly. Again, I just wanted to sip more than anything, not to give them a huge commercial. But if you do go there to CoachellaValleyCoffee.com. Use our discount code MarkT at checkout, 10% off everything on the site. So if you get merch, if you get spices, if you get teas, you get coffee, you get 10% off with Mark T at checkout. So,
The Mark Thompson Show.
yes, the huge bill sits in Congress. I will, I guess, address it first. It's a bill that includes such substantial cuts to major programs that support some of the neediest Americans, I'll put it that way, those who are in economic distress, seniors, particularly when it comes to health care. The price that will be paid by this nation is immense. It's an interesting thing, just to step aside, and I don't know that we can get to it today, but I'll certainly get to it this week, I promise. The way in which, in this short time, this bill passes, let's say, some of the essential aspects of the bill do include these Medicaid cuts and all the rest. And yet, it's only one piece of the way that there has been a systematic dismantling underway of American health, not even the healthcare system. I'm talking about health as determined by the changes at Health and Human Services by RFK Jr., for example. The billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars dedicated to research on cancer, on Alzheimer's, on everything from influenza to other infectious diseases like COVID. It's all going away. All going away. So, in a sense, and again, as I say, we can talk about this in greater detail in the days ahead, but this is part of the dismantling of America's health. There is a part of American government which is associated with those things that are too big to be handled in any other way, but with huge government funding. And I'd suggest that healthcare is one of those things, and health in general is one of those things. So let's get to the specifics. Here is, from Massachusetts, is it Ed Markey, the senator, Democratic senator, and I'll play you a Republican senator in a moment, just so you get a sense of if I can both sides it for a moment. And also I'll do it with Gary Dietrich. But this is a quick sense of what Markey was thinking as there is a marathon vote going on Capitol Hill. And as you know, Schumer, to his credit, I think, and I don't like to give Schumer a lot of credit because I think he's, I don't want to say an albatross, but he's a weight. His difficulty or challenges in this landscape of media being what it is, he's not a good communicator, you know, and I think there's a premium on being a good communicator now in American politics. But anyway, to his credit, though, I want to say, he made them read the almost 1,000-page bill out loud, saying, I know these senators haven't read it. I mean, it's come here sort of under the dark of night. In fact, Tony, is it easy for you? Can you quickly click over to Sheldon Whitehouse, who sort of sets the table? This is Sheldon Whitehouse, who I adore. He's a brilliant former prosecutor, and he just lays out the case quickly. And this will, again, set the table for us to continue. Here's Sheldon Whitehouse on the Senate floor.
This piece of legislation is a rotten racket. This place feels to me today like a crime scene. Get some of that yellow tape and put it around this chamber. The midnight transfer of wealth in this bill is disgusting. There's a backdrop here. The backdrop here is the wealth inequality in our country already, in which the wealthiest 1% of our population own 30% of the wealth, and the poorest half of our population together only own 3% of the wealth. Top 1%, third of the wealth. Bottom half of the population by income, 3% of the wealth. And against that backdrop, this bill transfers wealth from middle-class families to giant corporations, billionaires, and mega billionaires. And it transfers wealth from our children and grandchildren to present-day billionaires by adding $5 trillion to the debt limit to run up the debt of the country to fund the tax giveaways to these special interests and wealthy billionaires.
Okay, good stuff. Thank you. That's Sheldon Whitehouse. And then he's followed then by Ed Markey this weekend. Of course, you can imagine the Sunday shows were filled with those who are making the point on both sides. But the Democrats feel that the cuts here cut to the essence of the support structure for seniors and for low-income Americans. Go ahead, Tony.
And your Democratic colleagues have pointed this out, that Republican health care cuts could place more than 300 rural hospitals across the U.S. at disproportionate risk of closure, conversion, or service reductions. How much of a consideration do you think that is right now for your Republican colleagues? What are the conversations you're having?
Well, I just gave my Republican colleagues a chance to prevent a crisis in our hospitals and in our nursing homes across our nation. And only 2 Republicans crossed the line in order to support my amendment. And it would have been an amendment which would have guaranteed that there would have been a continuation of funding into hospitals, into nursing homes, into community health centers across our country. But instead, they voted to have a $1.6 trillion cut in aid for hospitals, for nursing homes across our country. $930 billion will be cut from Medicaid. $500 billion will be cut from Medicare. $300 billion will be cut from the Affordable Care Act. And it will result in, unbelievably, 17 million Americans losing their health insurance across our country. And these hospitals that are going to be closing are in severe jeopardy, are in the most rural parts of our country, the most vulnerable populations will, in fact.
That's something that should be emphasized and is being emphasized in conversation around the bill, but it is not likely to change. I mean, it's all about votes, sufficient heft to just probably get this by. Here's a Face the Nation conversation that with a Republican senator on this. And the one thing I would say to you as you listen to this, if you're listening on audio, or watching and listening, if you're watching and listening on YouTube, is listen to the way they found this wonderful thing around which they've been able to rally any number of ridiculous moves that they've been making so far. I'm talking about aggressive dismantling of government agencies, the defunding of everything from health services to environmental protections and regulations. They do it under the guise of what? They say waste, fraud, and abuse. We're rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse. How could you possibly be against the weeding out of waste, fraud, and abuse? So they'll get around to it always in every conversation. It is a cornerstone of their talking points. And wait for it here. It'll sneak right in. Because, yeah, everybody's against waste, fraud, and abuse. Is that what these cuts are? Go ahead, Tony.
And we're joined now by Texas Republican Congressman Michael McCaul. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So your Republican colleagues in the Senate have been working hard on trying to get this bill together, and they're probably going to eke it past.
Right.
But that's even with GOP lawmakers like Tom Tillis saying they can't stomach what this is going to do to Medicaid, an estimated $930 billion in cuts to it. That's more significant than what you all had voted to do in the House. Are you going to vote again for final passage if it looks like this?
No, I'm going to vote for it for this reason. I think these numbers, it's all about waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicare and Medicaid. What I'm voting for is a border security measure, $80 billion, $12 billion to reimburse states like mine. I'm voting for $150 billion that will go to our Department of Defense at a time when we saw with Iran is desperately needed. The world is on fire, Eastern Europe, Indo-Pacific, and then the tax cuts. I mean, if we don't extend these tax cuts, it'll be the largest tax increase in American history. For those 3 reasons, I'm a yes. I think everyone in the House They know the peril they're in if they vote no on this thing.
What do you mean the peril they're in?
I think, first of all, it's good for the nation. Secondly, they know that their jobs are at risk. Not just from the president, but from the voting, the American people. Our base back home will not reelect us to office if we vote no on this.
But is it about reelection or is it about
no? It's about
policies, right?
It's great for the country, and I've outlined the three top points.
But to help me understand, then you have such narrow margins in the House.
Yeah.
And you look at these projections from like the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, they say it violates the House instructions by $500 billion or more, what the Senate just put together here, and that deficits could rise more than $3 trillion. How do you get that through when you have fellow conservatives who are fiscal hawks and saying, I can't get with this? Like,
not to get in the weeds on the economics, but the dynamic scoring is not taken into account here by the Congressional Budget Office. That means that when you cut taxes, you actually get increased revenues to the Treasury. And that's something we saw under President Kennedy, under President Reagan, and under President Bush. And
Chip Roy and some of these other fiscal conservatives are going to come along for the ride?
Well, I think at the end of the day, I think they're going to vote for it.
You do?
Yeah, well, they're going to vote for it because of the threat from Donald Trump. And that's really what you're seeing play out in Washington in a big way. They're not voting for it for any kind of substantive reason. It is a bloated bill from the standpoint of the deficit that has been documented chapter and verse. And, you were just kind of hearing the Washington shuffle there. And even Musk.
He even said that, though, right off the bat. He couldn't help himself. He's like, hey, we ought to vote for this. You're in trouble if you don't vote for this.
Exactly. He said the quiet part out loud, and she kind of called him out and go, I mean, by our constituency. Really? Your constituency is banging on your door saying, pass this legislation? No. What got you and the GOP control of everything was immigration and talk about the southern border and inflation. Those two things. This is going to be
and they're scared.
A quake. It's going to be a brutal kind of titanic movement of policies that really do affect those who need them the most. I'm talking about those who are seniors and also those people who are economically underserved in many of these rural communities, hospital and healthcare infrastructure. Go ahead, Kim.
I think even the GOP members who don't want to vote for this bill are scared to death. They don't want to end up like Tom Tillis.
Right.
Right.
Tillis having to say, hey, I'm not going to vote. I'm not going to run for re-election.
Because he's being primaried. They have opened a super PAC, the Trump's administration, so that they can primary him and beat him because he want to support the big, beautiful bill. And so now he's saying, okay, you wanted to play it that way? I'm just not going to run again. And guess who they're thinking about running in that seat instead? Laura Trump. Trump.
It's funny that there's always a Trump who is perfect for every job, because when you've run out of Fox News hosts, you turn back to your own family.
I guess
to prop them up. But as he said, I look forward to the pure freedom to call the balls and strikes as I see fit, representing the great people of North Carolina to the best of my ability. And again, essentially, there's a showdown amongst some senators, a handful, who are generally campaigning for handouts for their districts, for their states. Lisa Murkowski is a great example. They had so many handouts for Lisa Murkowski to get her vote that the Senate, a parliamentarian, or it's not the parliamentarian, you can Google it. Maybe it is the parliamentarian, but in any case, there's it's not there's one outpost in the Senate, essentially, and you hear this from time to time when it comes to reconciliation. I've mentioned this before on this show, that things, when you've defaulted to reconciliation, so a simple majority will pass the legislation, you have to then show that everything in the legislation pertains to money, okay? So this bill, when it includes too many handouts that don't involve money, they can flag it. And that's kind of what happened in the case of Murkowski, and it happened in the case of a couple other things. There's still some handouts for them. But the point is, they're having to drag this thing across the finish line. But the Tillis example is a great one. I mean, when you have a senator from North Carolina saying that, the heat is just too hot, and I'm not going to deal with this. It's a sign. There are $1.1 trillion in health cuts, 11.8 million losing care. This is according to the Congressional Budget Office. And so these are numbers that have come in a nonpartisan way. And as I say, in the days ahead, I'll talk about how we're wrecking the nation's health, not only through this legislation, which is obviously going to disadvantage those in rural communities and those who are already economically pressured by everything going on in America, but those things that are helping on sort of the architecture of American healthcare and how that is changing. Meantime, the Trump train was running with Trump as the conductor, taking the victory lap with Maria Bartiromo. And there's no one who he likes to hang out with more than Maria Bartiromo, because she is drinking his bathwater. She is so into her Trump. I can only imagine her home, a shrine to the great president. Tony, play a little bit of Maria Bartiromo, whose reverence for her Lord and Savior, Donald Trump, extends even beyond mine. Go for it.
Do you think that the Iran regime hid some of the enriched uranium before the strikes?
No. You mean, did they take it out of the deep one? No.
Because you were pretty clear you can't have a weapon. You're going to have to come to the talk. Something's going to happen.
I don't think they did. No, I think, first of all, it's very hard to do. It's very dangerous to do. It's very heavy, very, very heavy. It's a very hard thing to do. Plus, we didn't give them much notice because they didn't know we were coming until just, then. And nobody thought we'd go after that site because everybody said that site is impenetrable. You can't, you're not going to be able. This way they did. It's at the bottom of a mountain, and it's granite. Granite's the hardest stone, and it's granite. So, no, they didn't. But I do believe they had people there because you had cars. They were saying cars, and those were masons. Those were people working with concrete. They were trying to seal up the entrance to where the bomb would most likely go in. And they did that. They were working on that, and the bomb went through it like it was butter, like it was absolute butter.
Because I saw reports that there were 400 kilograms, 800 pounds that they moved, but I wonder if it's traceable. I mean, if they were to have moved,
they didn't move anything.
They didn't move anything.
You know what they moved? Themselves. They were all trying to live. They didn't move anything. They didn't think it was going to be actually doable, what we did. And what we did was amazing. And we went, there were energy commissions that went there now. No, it's just thousands of tons of rock in that room right now. That room, the whole place was just destroyed. And the other two also. Now, Israel was able to do damage, but we did the final damage. And we have the greatest submarines in the world. We launched 30 rockets from submarines. Every single one of them hit their target.
How will you know
that's
if
sort of the overall, you can see how he pivots off of it and continues to message that way. What I thought was interesting as well, though, is something that isn't really getting a lot of, and you can understand why it's getting crowded out, perhaps out of the media sphere by everything else going on. Everything from the discussion around this huge legislative, what will be a titanic change in American society, to the ICE raids, et cetera. All of these things kind of crowd this out. But Donald Trump, during the NATO meetings, with respect to Iran, mentioned that he approved, in conversations with Iranian leadership, an attack on an American airbase. Go ahead, Tony.
Made in America, because we have the best hardware in the world. You saw that where 14 missiles were shot at us the other day. And they were very nice. They gave us warning. They said, we're going to shoot them. Is 1 o'clock okay? They said, it's fine. And everybody was emptied off the base, so they couldn't get hurt except for the gunners. They call them the gunners. And out of 14 high-end missiles that were shot at the base in Qatar, all 14, as you know, were shot down by our equipment. Amazing stuff. Amazing that they could do this.
Very good. So if that was true, Then you had the president in touch with Iranian leadership. May not have literally been the president, although he seems to suggest that it was. And at the appointed time, like it was an Evite, he said, sure, no problem. We'll evacuate the base and you guys can save face by hitting our base in Qatar. Now, if Biden or Obama had done that, we would have been okay with that? An American president okaying a return volley of missiles to an American airbase? I mean, that doesn't give anybody a cause for pause. I'll get Dietrich's reaction to that, but I was really astounded by that. So that is a bit on Iran. It seems as though the victory lap is still being taken. And as I say, we can talk about it more, but the future of what's going to happen with American policy toward Iran seems to increasingly be about negotiation, which is sort of where American policy was on Iran prior to this. Before Trump tore up the Obama-authored bill, you had what was likely a 10-year delay in any kind of nuclear enrichment that would have led to armament in a nuclear way in Iran. You were having fissile material removed from Iran under that bill. You were having inspectors with complete ability to go into these various reactor sites and check on things and check on development. And they could do it without any notice. So there was a lot right in that Obama bill, and it was torn up. Now, the Trump administration is trying to get back to that kind of thing. After this military exercise and this flex, they're trying to get back into reauthor a bill that would likely look like the Obama bill. Good luck. It could be a big ask right now, having just come out of these hostilities, or at least pause these hostilities for the time being.
The Mark Thompson Show.
Before I get to Gary Dietrich, I wanted to give you a little palate cleanser. Dietrich's our political analyst and our brother for so long with iHeart Radio, former colleague at KGO Radio, and he's at the CBS television station. But before I get to him, there was a notable passing. There have been a few, but I'll just mention one. Dave Parker, who was a terrific ball player, baseball player. He was called the Cobra. He passed away young, 74. 74 seems young, you'll find, as you get older. And he was the National League MVP in 1978, won a World Series with the Pittsburgh Pirates a year later, and won another championship in '89 with the Oakland A's. And he won a couple of batting titles, was known really for his outfielding, for his, what a complete player Dave Parker was. But I want you to see one play out of the All-Star game. So you got All-Stars in the All-Star game on all sides. Everybody's an All-Star. The guy running the bases, the guy hitting the ball, the guy fielding the ball. And Dave Parker makes one of the most legendary throws in the All-Star game from right field all the way to the plate. And sadly, if you're just listening, you'll have to just imagine. I'll describe the action. But here is Parker's plate. He just has to catch the ball, move his mitt down, and the runner is out. That was the magic of Dave Parker on that one play. As I say, he also had batting titles. And here's the amazing thing about Dave Parker, and there's a wrongness to this. Not in the Baseball Hall of Fame. I don't understand it.
He was set to be inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame next month.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So they'll have to do it posthumously because, yeah, he didn't quite make it to the ceremony. But yeah.
But I love that. Thank you for that. I just was looking to see if he was in, and he's not. So
74.
74 is young.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know who told me that? Gary Dietrich. He said, hey, man, 74 is young. I think he's right. Cobra was the book written by Dave Parker and Dave Jordan, A Life of Baseball and Brotherhood. Dave Parker, rest in peace. Amazing ball player. Really, really cool that we could take a second just to.
The Mark Thompson Show.
This guy is our former colleague from KGO Radio. He is the political analyst for iHeart Radio and also the political analyst on the CBS television stations. How about it for Gary Dietrich, who comes to us today from, is that your limousine that you're coming to us from, or is that a...
Right, that's my 74-year-old limousine. That's exactly what I meant.
I'm just noticing, I had my hair darkened over the weekend. I've got Gary goes with the, because you're secure in yourself. You just go with the graying and you look and you're distinguished and beautiful. I was asked by my colorist, would you like to let some of the gray go into the hair, Mark? Maybe more natural. I said, I never want to hear you say that ever again.
Mark, he used to say at the Kennedy School, the word gravitas was really big. So it adds to the gravitas. I mean, I talk about pretty serious things and you can't look like you're 23. You know what I mean?
Okay, fair enough. All right, let's get into it, sir. I first want to ask you about this legislation that is being dragged through the Senate right now. This is almost a 1,000-page bill. It seems as though there are, I suppose, at the tip of the spear on controversy are cuts to Medicaid, something that Trump had always said he would never touch. Can you speak to that, the politics of it, and also the practical nature of it?
Yeah. Well, as far as the politics go, it's not quite the third rail of politics like Social Security has been known for decades, but it's pretty close in some states. And what's interesting about this debate, Mark, that's been going on in the U.S. Senate is there's been a number of red state U.S. senators for whom this has been a big concern. Now, where this is going to end up when it finally gets back to the House, I don't know. But that's the politics of it. Democrats, of course, 100% aligned against it, as you would expect about Trump's big bill in any form. Now, in terms of the practicalities of it, it's going to have some impacts. What was interesting also, Mark, is that I'm reading, for example, at the California state level, Governor Gavin Newsom has proposed an asset test. What does that mean? This has been talked about for Social Security for many years, never happened. Basically, this would say that any Medicaid recipient in California who has more than $2,000 in so-called assets would not be eligible. So there's a lot of controversy that's just going to play out on this thing. The bottom line is this: in order to make this thing work and get through the non-filibuster stage, which means they have to pass certain Senate parliamentarian regulations, rules, protocols, whatever. They've got to balance this thing in some way. And so the Medicaid cuts offset, for example, the extension of the Trump tax cuts.
The effect of the Medicaid cuts is interesting because people may or may not realize that in a lot of these rural communities, the Medicaid money is one of the things that keeps the hospital open. So it's not just people who use Medicaid, but that there is a group that is at the hospital to the point that they are there frequently enough to provide revenue to the hospital through Medicaid. That's critical to keeping that hospital open. Without them, with those Medicaid cuts, those hospitals close.
Yeah, you really hit on the two main groups that this would impact negatively. One is the Medicaid recipients, and of course that primarily is seniors, although most of them are on Medicare, people with disabilities, and in states like California, it's been extended, as you know, to undocumented folks as well. And then you have the rural hospitals, and the rural hospitals, of course, are in, by definition, rural areas, which have a disproportionate number of elderly people, retired folks. And so it's a real problem. So what they've tried to do to ameliorate that, Mark, is include money. I think now the number is now $25 billion in basically grants to rural hospitals to try to take care of those folks.
Ameliorate is a ding word. I do want to mention, though, that this is a program that has historically, through the decades, expanded, right? Medicaid's really only gotten bigger. And this constriction, I mean, this is an extraordinary thing. It would change a lot of what America is.
Well, and the thing about it is, when you look at those numbers, Mark, you point out something really important. I was just reviewing those numbers for the Golden State. Of course, the biggest, the biggest spender on Medicaid, because have 10% of the population. This is quite remarkable. Over a 10-year period from 2014 to 2024, The California Medicaid budget went from 17 billion to 37 billion in 10 years. That's more than doubling. I mean, that is, in a 10-year period. So these are big numbers. They're going to have to be dealt with. The California legislature is struggling with that, as are others around the country.
So you've got senators, just to put, because this is the part that you're so good at, the X's and O's involving the specific senators. You've got Susan Collins from Maine, who I think, by the way, has an approval rating like it's 14% or 20%. I mean, it's just, she's fighting for her political life. And Josh Hawley from Missouri and Tillis from North Carolina, he was taking so much heat from Trump that he said, hey, I'm not in it anymore. I'm not running for re-election. They'd have set up a PAC. They'd set up essentially a way to dethrone him. And many of these legislators are afraid of being dethroned, even as this legislation flies in the face of what they think is important for their constituency.
Well, it's always a mixed bag. I mean, when you have a bill this large with this many different elements to it, 1,000 pages almost, Mark, as you pointed out, there's going to be things in there that senators like and their constituents like, and there's going to be things that they don't like. And this is the challenge when you're using this massive, legislative package, is that it's not singular. You can't just vote down a particular element of it, because in order to get it through the Senate, it's got to go in this giant blockbuster form so that it can move through without parliamentarian objections and without the possibility of what would be for sure an inevitable filibuster, by the Democrats. And the Republicans do not have the 60 votes to break that.
Let me ask you about something that I've noticed through the years, and you can really put specific faces on it, and that is the permission to dissent, because you know that something is going to get to the finish line anyway. You hear from people like Ron Johnson, who's a debt hawk. I mentioned Hawley. I mentioned Susan Collins, Murkowski. These are sort of the higher profile wigglers on stuff. That is to say, they're not rah, rah, rah. They're the I'm expressing reservations, et cetera. And they're even, and this is the kind of permission structure of Washington, they are even allowed to vote against or to make proposals or speak out against, because the understanding is that they need to do that almost in a performative way. You can tell me whether this is explicit or implied, for them to kind of save face, for their rep to maintain. But in the end, there is an agreement that this is going to get across the finish line.
Yeah, this happens all the time, Mark. And it's happened under democratically controlled Congresses as well as Republican. It has happened in places like Sacramento all the time. And that is this: if you have the votes you need, and of course, this is where vote counting by the legislative leadership is so vital. If you have the votes you need, then you can have a certain number of these folks that you're talking about. And yes, this is very clearly allowed. It's actually encouraged by legislative leadership if they know their members are in a swing district. Look, you can vote no on this one, okay? We got the votes we need to get it through the House or the Senate, or in the case of the California legislature, the Assembly of the Senate. So go ahead. We give you a pass, as they call it, on this. Sometimes it's to just vote absent. A lot of times, if needed, it's to vote no.
I thought there was interesting development over the weekend. I saw that Liz Cheney issued an urgent call, as it was characterized, to Democrats, saying this is an authoritarian administration. Those are her words. And, she really has, I think, she sort of defined her last chapter politically as anti-Trump and anti-authoritarian, to the extent that she really feels that this administration is that. So she's saying, stop raising money to the Democrats and start raising hell. I mean, she didn't say it like that, but was practically like that. And it's interesting to me that clarion call comes from her, and I don't know to what extent it's going to animate, because as you just noted, I think implied, right now it's all about votes and the legislative process. And I don't know how much screaming and yelling is actually going to get through, but I'd love your thoughts on the Cheney letter.
Yeah. Well, Liz Cheney, I think, kind of ran her last political lap, so to speak, at least in the current era, last fall, when she was used, as you know, by Democrats, particularly in states like Pennsylvania, thinking that she would be a real asset. They discovered that was not so much the case. So I really don't know, Mark. Honestly, I doubt whether there's much political capital left from Liz Cheney. I think Democrats, they're more concerned about their own internal divisions. They're trying to unify themselves both at the DNC and within Congress. And I don't think Liz Cheney is going to make a huge difference one way or the other.
She, just to put specifics on it, did suggest some policies and some strategies moving forward. She said you should form an independent civilian-powered investigative coalition, veterans, whistleblowers, journalists, watchdog organizations. She said join the International Criminal Court. You know, I mean, these are things, some of which, like that one, will never happen, but fund state-level resistance infrastructure. Don't just send postcards, she says. Send resources. Channel DNC funds into rapid response teams, legal defense coalitions, sanctuary networks, and digital security training. She says use your platform to educate the public on rights and resistance tactics. She says leverage international media and watchdogs. Stop hoping that U.S. cable news is going to wake up. They're too busy playing both sides of fascism. She says, feed the real stories to the BBC, Al Jazeera, The Guardian, Reuters, Der Spiegel. She said, leak them to anonymous drop boxes if you have to. She goes on, create a digital safe haven for whistleblowers and defectors. And she makes the point that not everybody in the Trump administration is loyal. Some are scared, some want out. Build the channels for encrypted, anonymous, protected leaks. And study the collapse and the comeback, she also says. Learn from South Korea and how they manage their brief rule under dictatorship. So she, again, it wasn't like a 4-paragraph letter saying, you know, we're mad as hell and we won't take it anymore. She did lay out specific strategies. And I wonder if there's anything like that, even the primordial ooze of that in the Democratic Party. Or, as you say, are they too busy trying to find their message and their next leaders?
Well, I think it's some of both, Mark. I mean, certainly in states like California, for example, as you know, there's been tens of millions of dollars specifically allocated by Newsom and the legislature to fight Trump in the courts. And so I think there's been sort of a strategic analysis of, okay, where are we going to be most effective? Well, up until now, a lot of that has been through the judiciary, as you know. Now, this recent Supreme Court ruling, you know, enjoining a lot of local district judges or regional district judges from issuing nationwide edicts, that may hamper some of that. But the most effective resistance so far in terms of actual effect has been through the court system, as you know. So we'll see where that goes, if that's going to continue to have the legs. Nationally, you're hearing from Democrats, yes, they're trying to raise money. I mean, they are absolutely fixated, and probably rightly so, on about 15, 16 months from now, the midterm elections. I mean, if they can take back a half a dozen seats in the House and get control of that lower chamber, they absolutely hamstring anything, certainly from a fiscal point of view, because all fiscal measures have to originate in the House, that the Trump folks would do. So that's, I think, the focus. What you're hearing is it's difficult for them to raise large sums of money. There's kind of a wait and see approach, perhaps also understandably, from, you know, large donors getting their fingers singed 9 months ago in November of 24. So we'll see where this all goes. You know, it's always easy to put a laundry list together. And I'm not, you know, in any way dissing what Liz Cheney has done, but I am sure that each and every one of those things has already been thought about inside the DNC. And of course, they're trying to just pull their own coalition together, their own leadership structure together. And that's happening too in the House and the Senate, with especially this emphasis by folks who want to see a younger leadership structure going into the midterms for the Democrats.
You mentioned Gavin Newsom, and Tony, can you play for Brother Dietrich the Newsom lawsuit, which is these are comments around the Newsom lawsuit, $787 million. He's suing Fox News for defamation. Here he is.
As it relates to Fox, I'm not pleased. Donald Trump lied about a phone call he had with me, quote unquote, the day before. Fox chose to cover up that lie. Fox chose in multiple instances to amend, omit, and edit facts that were in evidence in order to shape a narrative that was malicious, which was defamatory. And as a consequence of their lies, as a consequence of their lack of journalistic ethic, as a consequence of crossing that red line as it relates to news, I filed a defamation lawsuit against them. they seemingly have learned nothing from the Dominion lawsuit, which they settled for an unprecedented $787 million. Fox News is a propaganda network, the national news. Local Fox affiliates do an extraordinary job. Back to your question. My message to the newsrooms of most of the Fox affiliates, thank you for being excellent journalists. Thank you for having ethical standards. Thank you for doing your best to communicate truth and build trust.
So this is a lawsuit, and let's just to again set the table. It's related to the protest, the pushback against ICE, and then the invoking of National Guard powers and the president essentially bigfooting the governor with the calling in of the Guard and also of the Marines. He said, Trump did, that he had just spoken to Newsom the day prior, I think it was. Isn't that it, Gary? I believe a day ago, I called him to tell him, got to do a better job. He's doing a bad job. But Newsom said the last time they'd spoken was 3 days prior to that, and Newsom said they'd not discussed the protests at all. And so apparently there was, as alleged by, the governor, there was creative editing such that they made a case for the fact that Trump had actually spoken to Newsom when he hadn't. That is to say, talked to him on the schedule that Trump referred to, which was, I just talked to him yesterday. So Newsom is suing around that. And so that is a defamation suit that's pretty substantial. I mean, that's $787 million. And the statement from Newsom was, if Fox News wants to lie to the American people on Donald Trump's behalf, it should face consequences just like it did in the Dominion case. I believe the American people should be able to trust the information they receive from a major news outlet. Until Fox is willing to be truthful, I will keep fighting against their propaganda machine. That is his position. So as we finish up with Gary, your thoughts on that move on the part of Newsom to push back on the real narrative as opposed to just swallowing the propaganda that comes out of the Fox News machine?
Well, a couple of things about this lawsuit, Mark. I think we can say assuredly he's not going to be invited on Sean Hannity's show again anytime soon. I think we can pretty much establish that those days right now, at least, are over. We'll see what happens closer to 2028 when the governor's rolling undoubtedly his campaign bus around the country. But, he's taken this position as being the anti-conservative, media, anti-red state governor position. And I think it just fits. It fits with his narrative right now of, after this budget cycle, I've been telling people, and after Kamala makes her decision, supposedly here in 30 to 45 days about whether she's running for governor of California to replace Gavin Newsom, I mean, he's all in. All the chips get pushed into the table for being right now the anti-Trump, anti-MAGA candidate. And he's been getting some national presses, in the last few weeks about that, saying he's moving up the charts in terms of 2028 prospects. Now, to the actual legal, likelihood of this, you got to understand the Dominion lawsuit was very different. I mean, they were able to demonstrate apparently very specific economic losses because of the accusations that were made. And so it's going to be tough, I think, for the Newsom people to prove something similar.
Well, before I let you go, I've got to ask you, although I think I know what you're going to tell me, to handicap this legislation as it's dragged through the Senate. It's getting modified, annotated, otherwise changed. Then it'll go back to the House. What's its future?
Okay, what do you think I'm going to say, Mark? Because
I think you're going to say that it's going to pass, that it will pass the Senate. It'll just pass the Senate, and that eventually, and the House, while maybe not agreeing with all the Senate changes, will also pass it, and that this legislation is on final approach, is what I think you're going to say.
Yeah, I think you're right, Mark. I think it's going to be a push. President wanted it on his desk for a big July 4th signing. That may be a push. I mean, between now and Friday, a multitude of things could happen. But Trump kind of said over the weekend, well, we're making progress. If it doesn't get here by the 4th, it's not the end of the world. The reason why I think it's going to pass, Mark, is very simple, and it's singular. And that is, this is their shot. I mean, if they don't get this bill passed, the chance of breaking it apart, and this is why they've kept it together, the chance of breaking it into individual pieces and subjecting each one of those to parliamentarian scrutiny and potentially some of those to the filibuster in the Senate, which would doom them. I think they realize truly and honestly, Mark, between now and the midterms, this is it. Will there be other things that get through? Maybe, but nothing like this in terms of its consequential nature.
Gary, love your thoughts. Thank you. A more eventful time in modern American history I can't think of, and I look forward to our next visit. Thanks, pal.
Likewise, buddy. Have a great show.
Gary Dietrich, everybody. Gary Dietrich, by the way, comes to us with a sponsorship. Remax Gold. Bill Campbell is the guy at Remax Gold. If you're relocating into or from Northern California, you need a highly respected real estate professional, and that person is Bill Campbell at Remax Gold. You can call or text Bill 530-448-7474, 530-448-7474. Bill Campbell at Remax Gold.
The Mark Thompson Show.
Yeah, I have one of the world's leading logistics expert waiting, but and I'm going to get into what's happening with the supply chain and tariffs, and I think that story has sort of been ignored because of all this other stuff going on. But, I made a pledge to you, and viewers who are regulars of this show know I made this pledge. If you're new, I'm really concerned about the nature of these ICE raids, the way they're being done, the warrantless nature. A lot of the these detentions are not reflecting a kind of due process future. I think there's a perversion of what's happening on the streets of America that just needs some attention. And I've also mentioned that I think that there's been a conflation between the southern border issues, which everyone felt really were there, kind of the stopping the bleeding on the southern border with all the illegal immigration flow that was going on at that time. And then what's happening on the streets of America, as I say, and then the communities around America where ICE agents are going in and rounding up people at car washes, at Home Depot, at Lowe's, construction sites, at high school graduations. There's just a grotesque quality to that I think Americans are not as cool with, So the pledge is that I would tell you a story, at least try to, most days, with things that are going on around these ICE raids. And so it is today. And this one came to us, didn't it, Kim, from, is it teacher Lori who sent us this, who's a regular viewer and listener of the show?
No, this one is from Amy B.
Amy B.
And it comes to us from the Mark Thompson Show fan discussion page on Facebook.
Oh. What is the fan discussion page called?
The Mark Thompson Show fan discussion page.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
Sometimes you don't need to do too much with the title.
It's easy to find and it works.
So the story is about a mother who is arrested at an LA court alongside her 6-year-old son who has cancer. She is now suing ICE. She is a Honduran woman who sought asylum in the U.S., and she's suing the Trump administration after immigration agents arrested her and her children, including her 6-year-old son, who was diagnosed with leukemia. This happened at an immigration court. And increasingly, I mentioned Lowe's and Home Depot and these high school graduations and construction sites. But when you go to the courts, which is where they also are going, and you scoop up people, detain them, arrest them, when they are there legally to pursue a claim of asylum, it's even more grotesque. These are people who are playing within the legal lines that we've set down. So that's where she was, at a court in Los Angeles with her 6-year-old son who was diagnosed with leukemia. And she is now suing. She's with her 9-year-old daughter and 6-year-old son. They've been in custody at a Texas detention facility for several weeks following their arrest. The government has placed them in expedited removal proceedings. Lawyers for the family say they were detained, the family was, as part of the administration's nationwide campaign to summarily arrest law-abiding non-citizens when they attend their immigration court hearings. Lawyers go on and say such arrests that are occurring at rates never before seen in the United States, in this case, pick up this family. And this warrants a lawsuit that the family is being detained in violation of their constitutional rights. The family applied to come to the U.S. last year. They were fleeing their home country where they face, quote, imminent menacing death threats. I mean, this is the stuff of asylum claims. They followed the lawful process. They were paroled and went to live with the woman's mother, according to court documents. The boy's been diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. He got that diagnosis when he was 3 years old, underwent 2 years of successful treatment, and supposedly no more leukemia cells were found in his blood. But he does need regular monitoring and medical care. So it's that monitoring and medical care that he's not getting at a Texas detention facility. Plus, they were not permitted to leave or make calls. The 6-year-old, after seeing an agent with a gun, urinated on himself in fear and was left in wet clothing for hours. I know, it's awful. The family's been held at a detention center in Dilley, Texas, since their arrest. The 6-year-old already has missed a medical appointment related to his diagnosis because of this incarceration. Not to mention the serious psychological trauma, which is talked about in the lawsuit. And research has found that children at the Dilley facility suffer from inadequate medical care, according to the suit. The 6-year-old has lost his appetite, experienced easy bruising, occasional bone pain, looks pale, all of which are recognized as symptoms of leukemia. I can go on, but I want you to be aware of what's happening in your country, because to me, it's an abomination. So, we continue.
The Mark Thompson Show.
It was great. I loved it.
How would you handle this? We could try ignoring it, sir.
Morning.
You cannot say you love your country.
Where are my weed smokers at?
Stay at home and get baked.
Right on, everybody. One of the world's leading... Oh, thank you. Thanks for the daily therapy session, says Solenvi. $20 super chat. Wow, thank you for that, Solenvi. Very, very cool. Thank you for the daily therapy session.
Big shout out.
It's kind of a dark therapy session. Sorry about that. Chaplain Fred is a regular on the show, rapidly becoming a Hall of Famer. A $20 super chat says, hi, Mark, Kim, and Albert. I'm just sick to hear Trump and or someone say they need to move if they do not want to die. That was the statement made by, I forget who said it. I mean, how heartless you need to be, he says, to express yourself that way about a human being. It makes me want to cry. There's a lot to cry about in the new America. Luis says, I want to share that our beloved Sammy Rubin is being honored by KTLA with a $5,000 scholarship benefiting journalism students with an emphasis on entertainment reporting. That is really cool. We had that in the rundown to get to, but I just kind of got held up with other stuff. Right, Kim? But that is the Sam Rubin Memorial Scholarship. And Sam is mentioned because he was a great friend of the show. I mean, you'll remember the morning after the Oscars, he's been up all night. He does this morning show on KTLA. He's been up literally for probably 36 hours straight. And he joined our show from bed and did a whole segment. It wasn't just like a stunt. He did a whole breakdown of the Oscars and what had happened and all the rest. He was a great personal friend of mine and a great friend to this program. June Swoon is over, says Bo 3670. But what a fun event with, quote, Keith Richards stealing the show and obviously most of the bong hits that night. Yeah, that was Richard Delamater. He really hit it hard. Thanks to all the great guests, and here's my tip. Next up, July 4th, ice raids at a bodega near you. Gosh, I hope not. But thank you for the $25 super chat. That's really, really cool. We're a crowd-funded show, so you'll pardon us for jumping out and reading some of the great comments and greetings that we get, and also the super stickers and super chats are a great way to support us in addition to Patreon and PayPal. Those names are rolled at the end of the show. Kathleen Bryant, 6088, with a $20 super sticker. Big shout out to all of you.
Big shout out.
Thank you to Kathleen Bryant. Right on. Let's get it on.
The Mark Thompson Show.
Now, one of the world's leading logistics expert is also a friend of the show. Really excited that life has just worked out to the point that we can check in with him periodically. So much of economic policy, the tariffs, COVID policies, et cetera, have affected this thing called the supply chain. All of a sudden, we become aware of the supply chain. Well, again, one of the great experts in supply chain logistics is a friend of our show. He joins us from time to time, and one of those times is now. The great Jonathan Rosenthal. Hi, John.
Mark, great to see you. Although I must say, following that story that you told earlier is tough to do. That's a tough act to follow. In terms of the woman whose son was taken away. It has an interesting connection, though, to supply chain. Oddly enough, because this is a problem that we're experiencing in supply chain. For example, just here in Southern California, there are roughly 1.8 million square feet of warehouse. We happen to run about 5.5 million square feet of warehouse. Those warehouses are largely staffed by legal immigrants who are in some form or stage of their processing, and so we have had similar problems with people just being scared. Scared to come to work. We've got 1,500 people working in the warehouses, and there are thousands and thousands more like that in cities around the country. And people just, I go into the warehouses and I talk to these folks. As you know, Mark, you've watched my daughter grow up from a baby. She's now a human rights lawyer, and she wants to help. And so she's constantly asking me, how do I help? And I go in and talk to these folks. They're scared. They don't know what's happening, and they don't know who they can reach out to. And so we have problems staffing the warehouse because they don't want to come in to work. Obviously, we can't support the supply chain without this. By the way, this is happening in other facets of the supply chain, trucking and drayage and things like that. But I'm sorry to get off on a tangent.
No, it's so of the moment. I'm glad that you mentioned it. It's an extremely relevant and I think only increasingly relevant thing to mention. So I'm grateful that you pick up that strand. I also would ask you. Yeah, sorry.
No, I was just going to say. Let's talk about what's really going on in the bigger context of supply chain. I think we've all gotten over the fact. I've been doing this for almost 40 years in some form of logistics. I as I've said to you before, I was like, before COVID, I was the last guy you wanted to talk to at a cocktail party. Now people seem to migrate over to talk about like supply chain. Nobody ever talked about supply chain. Right?
Yeah, that's exactly kind of what I'm saying. COVID made us all aware of the supply chain.
Yeah, it's like, so you mean I can't get my shit? Wait a second, I got to get my stuff. I need my stuff.
I do. It's funny. I will say this just as an aside, and then I want to ask you about tariffs in the state of the state.
Yeah.
But I think there's a quality, and this is a sad thing, and I'm not asking you to necessarily agree with me, but this is my feeling. I think Americans, and this may be a developed world thing, are really only concerned when they can't get their shit. When they can't get their stuff, they want to know why. That's the time that people become engaged. Now, I understand they can also get engaged around wallet issues, pocketbook issues, but the general disposition of Americans, I'd say, and this is what I'm learning is, I don't know, Medicaid, the whole problem, the budget deficit, Iran, et cetera. Yeah, but now is that streaming on Netflix or is that on HBO Max? How do I get the latest episode of fill in the blank? When they can't get their stuff that's at the store, at any number of stores, when the shelves go bare, that's when they want to know why and all of a sudden become engaged. Otherwise, I think we're a kickback kind of...
Mark, I think you're spot on, but I think you're falling short. And that is that what I see is that people get, when they're engaged, when they're impacted, they can't get their stuff or some other thing. We tried to get involved in the fires here because that's a logistics issue. The city was shocked when I told them that our scientists told them that to take the debris out of the Palisades was going to be 1.1 million truckloads. And they went, oh my God, like, how do we do that? Right? That's a logistics challenge. Yes, people are impacted, but they're only impacted for a moment. And so the minute the impact subsides, like COVID, right? When COVID happened and you couldn't get your stuff and there was 1 million containers offshore, and the ABC News was broadcasting ships offshore, and you couldn't get, everybody was focused. What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? The minute it's off the front page, nobody gives a shit, right? And the problem is that these are complex problems that require persistence. They require dedication. They require time and energy. Before that, there's a great picture of that we had 1 million, we being the industry, we had 1 million containers, 1 million containers sitting offshore. Now, why were they sitting offshore? Because there was no dock space. By the way, what that picture's not showing are the ships in transit. The ships coming from China, coming from Asia, were slowed. So through the ocean, those ships were also, there's many, many more ships that, but here's my problem, sort of the bigger problem. Like, why don't we have the persistence and the foresight to say, we have a problem. We actually, in supply chain, we actually know what the problem is. We know what it is, but we don't have the persistence, the grit. I love that term, and I love Angela Duckworth's book on grit. We don't have the grit to fix the problem, to stick with it, And so that's what we're seeing. And look, I know you want to talk about the tariffs, which is great. The tariffs are just another example of sort of these aberrations, these wild swings, these in the moment, right? Like, why are we doing tariffs? It's a great soundbite. And as long as it's a soundbite, people care about tariffs. The minute it's no longer a soundbite, nobody cares, right? And the problem is that it's completely inconsistent with a thoughtful, long-dated business strategy. I mean, just think of me as a business guy, right? I mean, we own logistics companies. You're asking me to make a commitment to things like buying 100 trucks, or renting 1 million square feet of warehouse, or investing $10 million in information systems. You're asking me to make a commitment. I'm no different than any other business guy. And my question to you is, as the government, what am I betting on here? I mean, if you're going to change the rules, and I'm pregnant, I'm invested.
Right,
my
you're
money,
committed. Sure.
I'm committed. That to me creates huge risk. And so the worst part about the tariffs, look, I don't want, the politics aside, right?
Yeah, you're not Trump, anti-Trump in this conversation, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Was there some basis for the tariffs? Sure, but I'm more interested in what we have done, to our system. I'm a big believer, Mark. You know that I have spent a lot of time reorganizing large companies like logistics companies, United Airlines and Kmart and things like that, where I'm called upon by the federal courts in a bankruptcy to lead the reorganization of a large company. I will tell you that the fundamental precept of why we have a standard of living second to none is because we have access to capital. This is the 48% of all foreign investment is here in the US. That is 48%. So people want their money in the US. Why do they want their money in the US? Because it's perceived as safe. The government's not going to take my money. The government's not going to do something stupid. Go try to raise money in Peru. Good luck. Go try to raise money someplace where it's uncertain. So the tariffs are just another very important and critical another way of saying to the world, we're not so predictable, we're not so safe. And what that's going to do, it has to, and you saw it in the bond rates. That's what freaked Trump out, right? He saw the bond rates and he went, "Holy shit!"
Yeah,
like that was a big deal. People don't.
In other words, the faith that people had in the country and in the system that you talk about, the predictability, the solidity,
Correct.
that was all reflected in that bond rate, and that's what John's talking about. That bond rate had to be increased because all of a sudden, U.S. isn't the investment that everybody thought it might be.
That's right. And that gets immediately reflected in the market, right? Immediately. And what did those bond rates do? They jumped. You've got to, if I'm going to invest in the US, in US treasuries, then I need more return because I perceive as an investor that I'm experiencing more debt. Now that translates into our standard of living. It translates into everything we do. We do not want instability. We want to be predictable. We want to be thoughtful. We want to be perceived as smart. But you do not want unpredictable. And the tariffs are a tremendous sign to the world that we are unpredictable. One day we're 50%, the next day we're 150%, then we're 30%, then what do you think that does? It ultimately, it drives away capital, and it drives away people's interest in investing. I know you're on a short fuse, Mark.
No, I'm on a short time. I want to get to a lot of stuff, but I love that you talk about this because we've talked about it a bunch on the show, but you actually are living it. Jim Slayton says this: I worked in supply chain for probably a little over 30 years. It's almost a nightmare when everything is going almost perfectly, he says. So this must make it like even more challenging, John.
Well, Jim, and to Jim's question, we know how to, he's right. And it's because the supply chain is so antiquated, our information systems, where's my shit? When's it going to get here? Why isn't it getting here? Those are largely analog systems. There are no real networks analytics. Mark, I've spent the past 7 years investing in almost exclusively in artificial intelligence and trying to fix this information problem, which is at the core of the problem. To answer Jim's question, why are the systems so messed up? I mean, in a perfect world, what he's saying is, geez, I was in logistics for 30 years. In a perfect world, it's a nightmare, right? Okay, well, yes, it is. We do know how to make it a lot better. But boy, when you throw in things like tariffs that you can't predict, and I mean, there's a lot of companies going out of business because they cannot afford the tariffs.
Explain quickly, because again, our time is short, and I want to get to one other thing which you predicted on the show, and I want to give it a chance to review it because it's actually come to pass.
You were ahead of the New York Times, pal.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, you were brilliant with
by
that.
a bunch. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about what you just said, which is companies going out of business because they can't afford. Explain how a tariff increase or a tariff, even uncertainty, affects what you're talking about, money and how you get goods at the port and how those goods are then released to you. And if you can just boil that down in 90 seconds, that'd be great.
Listen, it ain't rocket science. So if you're a distributor here, let's say I don't know what you're distributing. You're distributing dog beds. I don't know, whatever it is, right? You're a dog bed distributor and they're being made in China. Now they fill up a container in China with a bunch of dog beds and they're sending it to Mark Thompson's dog bed home of dog beds, right? Okay, you've got to post a letter of credit, so that's eating up your liquidity. You don't, Mark, you have endless amounts of money, but other people, might not. So you've got to provide the dog bed manufacturer with payment in order for them to release those dog beds. So they now ship those dog beds. Okay, fine. You've now paid for those dog beds. They now land at the port. Before you're able to remove that container with the dog beds, you have to commit to paying the tariff. Where do you get the money? You just spent your liquidity. And now you're going to deliver those dog beds to your customer at TJ Maxx or wherever. and they're going to take 60 days to pay you. So where do I get the money to pay the tariff? And it's a real problem. And by the way, shipping rates have quadrupled. So I not only have to pay the tariff, but even worse, I have to pay the shipper 4 times what I would have normally paid.
And just on that last thing, why have the shipping rates gone up so much?
These are the over-the-water rates have gone up. Last I checked, which was about a week ago, they've gone up by about 300%, because people are now speculating about what's going to happen, right? And there's some speculation that these tariffs are going to somehow work their ways out, and all of a sudden there's going to be tremendous amount of orders because you're going to have to fill those empty shelves.
So it's in response to anticipated demand. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. So
Okay.
it's a market. It's a marketplace. Correct.
Now I only have a couple of minutes left, so now I want to double. So look, we're going to revisit this, I hope, with you. But essentially what you're saying is, in this short term, maybe even medium term period, you're looking at great instability, a great human cost as a result of maybe some of the immigration stuff that does pinch the logistic thing as well. And also the uncertain U.S. policy when it comes to tariffs affecting orders and affecting businesses' abilities to stay in business, is what you're saying,
Yeah. And look, this administration, unfortunately, this has been his life story of creating chaos. And, frankly, he's got more money than I do. So, he's doing something right. But I mean, if you leave business carnage and economic carnage behind you, but you walk away with a lot of money in your pockets, that's not exactly a success story. I mean, it's certainly not a success story if you're the president, right? But this is, I mean,
it's like a private equity success story that's being played out.
Well, I don't like that because I do private equity. But,
no, I know. I'd love to have that debate with you another time. But
let's face it. I mean, if you look back at his history over the past 40 years, he thrives on chaos, right? So, and it's not my style, but it is his style. So I'm a little bit like, guys, you kind of got what you paid for, right? Like this wasn't a secret that he's, so they create chaos in an institutional world, in a government world. Boy, that's the last thing you want.
Sure.
Right? Because it creates all these economic and monetary issues. So
all right. We'll revisit this, and I will debate with you, even though I'm ill-equipped to really debate with you of all people. But I'd still like to visit it with you on your next go round with us. I do want to mention that you identified something here that wasn't identified anywhere else. It was, as you say, ahead of the New York Times. It was all because of you talking about drone technology. And if you follow the breadcrumbs of drone technology, the breadcrumbs go back to China and data collection. I wonder if you could review what you talked about. And now this has been a crisis consideration in the contemporary media outlook and political outlook, the Chinese collection of data from America.
Yes. So let me make it real short. So I learned about 2.5 years ago, as a result of one of my investors, a company called Japan Post, which is the Japanese postal system. They own the largest manufacturer outside of China of drones. A drone is nothing more than a fantastic way of collecting digital information. We think about the digital information as optical. You fly the drone over your kid's bar mitzvah and you take pictures. Well, that's just optical digital data, right? So, but there are many other kinds of digital data that you can collect. LiDAR, infrared, there's all kinds of stuff. So what you're referring to is, about 2 years ago, I brought to your attention. You were my first call, by the way. That
you never forget your first call.
Yes, exactly. that I had found out, which was shocking to me. We all knew that the industrial drone market which is the collection of information as opposed to weaponry, right? In the industrial market, that there were 900,000 Chinese drones in U.S. airspace. They're used by police departments and fire departments and all kinds of stuff. They're actually very good devices. They're well-made Chinese devices called DJI. They own 80% of the global industrial drone market. 80%. Okay. What no one thought about, including the US government, there was a 60 Minutes piece that my head almost exploded about 6 months ago, including the US government, that the information, the digital information off that drone was uploaded onto the cloud. And you then had very interesting software that you could use as a user. You could manipulate that data, but the servers of that information, the cloud, sat in China. Now, why is that important? It's important because that information is not just your kid's bar mitzvah. It is geospatial, that is within 1 centimeter granularity. It's telling you where every telephone pole in the US is, where every power line is, where every reservoir is, every roadway. We have mapped the entire country geospatially. Now, why is that important? Because when you try to disrupt, people think about China coming with bombs and dropping. That's not how they're going to do it, kids. That is not how they're going to do it. That is a form of disruption. Information is much more powerful. When they figure out, which they've already done, which are the 6 power plants in the Western US that will shut down the country, and we know they've already installed malware in the software, right? So when they decide to do that, what do you think? Would they rather drop a bomb in, Van Nuys, or shut down the entire power grid in the US? I don't know. Power grid seems to me to be pretty good shot.
Sure. And
that's my point.
And the point being, if this is legitimately your lead adversary, as we always hear articulated by Donald Trump and by many others prior to Donald Trump, as you say, the prior administration as well, if they're legit adversary, to be polite, or enemy, to be even sharper about it, then this is scandalous. And and the reality is there is little or nothing being done about it right now. It's still.
Well, they finally did. I did testify twice to congressional subcommittee. I was a little surprised, and I went with we have an aviation group. I went with my aviation guy to testify, and he's a retired 3-star, F-18 pilot, 3-star admiral, ran Naval Air Command. So he's a real guy. They look at me and they go, what do you know? But I thought he would carry some weight, which he did. And they were focused on all the wrong issues. They didn't understand the power of geospatial intelligence. They didn't understand. I'm not sure they still understand, why are the Chinese doing this? What are they going to?
You couldn't bring them up to speed. You just explained it here in 90 seconds.
Yeah, we did. We did explain it to them. The staff was actually quite good. They passed, or I should say, they introduced a drone bill, or a bill on China, which was supposed to restrict. But they really should have done this, immediately. What you should have said is, as of June 1st, there will be no more Chinese drones in U.S. airspace. Now that got a lot of pushback.
Because the problem is they're the biggest makers of this stuff, as you just said, 80%, right?
Well, even worse than that, it's the local fire department who spent their budget. They've spent, and they say, well, wait a second, we got a fleet of drones and we need them and we don't have the money to. Now, could you retrofit those? Now, I want to give you a shout out, Mark, because I went to you and you were kind enough to talk about this on your show. I then went to the New York Times and they said, wow, if this is true, this is the biggest story of the year. And then they whiffed the ball. They did nothing.
Then they didn't do the story. Yeah.
Well, they did the story. They did a story, a kind of lackluster story about a year later.
Yeah, well, that to me is not doing the story. On the heels of the call, they should have at least pursued it more. John, I've got to wrap up. I'm so grateful for you making time for us. You're a very big deal. I'm not just saying that. I mean, you're really in charge of so much, and you're watching so much, and that you'd carve out some time means a lot to us here on the show.
Mark,
Please
your
come visit, maybe
listeners,
even
I've
next
known
month.
you. I've known you for 30 years, or maybe
I know.
more.
Don't remind me.
You're an incredible public asset, and your listeners. I think I'm not bullshitting you. You're not paying me for this. Maybe you are. I should, send you my bill. But your show's fantastic. You bring the most interesting people on, other than me, the most interesting people on, and I think you're a fantastic public servant. So
you're so lovely. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I don't mind going overtime for that. Thank you, John. All the best, my friend. And thank you. John Rosenthal. See you, John.
The Mark Thompson Show.
He was complimenting me, Kim. I can't wrap him up. God damn it.
You have to go to KFI.
I got to go to KFI.
He was amazing, by the way. I love the conversation.
He is just so terrific, and the way he
Super
explains things he explains things so beautifully.
Like, I feel like I understand shipping, and I totally don't.
So, but I'm not leaving without leaving you here on our show with a conversation I had, a wonderful conversation about this book. It's a true palate cleanser to all that ails us in these political times, and the conversations about ICE and the conversations about the big beautiful bill and logistics issues and all the rest. This is called Human History on Drugs, and I just finished a conversation with this wonderful author and researcher, and we give it to you now. Go for it.
The Mark Thompson Show.
I am excited about this author and this work. Sam Kelly is the author of Human History on Drugs, an utterly scandalous but entirely truthful look at history under the influence. It is such a fun read. Welcome, Sam Kelly, to the show. Hi, Sam.
Hey, it's good to be here.
I want to tell everybody right away before we start our conversation that we're having some internet glitching on my end, not Sam's end. But if it seems a little old school Max Headroom or some of my words get repeated or whatever, that the internet gods are going to visit tomorrow, but I could not get them to visit prior to this interview, and I didn't want to put this conversation off because I've been looking forward to it. So the human history of drugs. And one of the great things you've done, you're a Stanford graduate, and you're on the autism spectrum, and you explain that because the research is so complete on this gold vein of a topic, that oftentimes doesn't get the exploration that any topic along these lines would get, like drug use through history, from luminaries through history. And you kind of explain it as your autism kicking in and you just couldn't stop the researching.
Yeah, no, this is absolutely, plenty of people with autism have these special interests that they're very dedicated to and derive a great deal of fulfillment from researching these things and finding out more about what they really like. You'll have even people with some sorts of intellectual disabilities will nonetheless have special interests that they excel at. That's the old idea of the savant. But regardless of what type of autism it is, a lot of people with autism do like to really hyper focus and get deep into these subjects of passion. And this was absolutely a subject that I was passionate about and thought was tons of fun to learn about and tell others about.
Oh, it is. And the way you present it is tons of fun. I mean, it really is all the detail plus just this whimsical way that you lay it out. So let me start at the beginning. Your book begins with the Oracle of Delphi, and you have all these facts about the Oracle of Delphi, first of which is, I suppose, Oracle of Delphi was a woman, right?
Yes.
And again, Oracle of Delphi, like all of the main characters in your book, on drugs.
Yes, yes.
Now, what was this woman charged with, though? Like major stuff, right? Like she was a future, what do you call it, soothsayer kind of person, right?
Yeah, no, it was believed that the Oracle of Delphi had a direct link to the gods. Like what the gods were planning, the Oracle of Delphi had an awareness of it that extremely few mortals could ever come anywhere near. And so kings, leaders, anyone important who wanted to make like a life or death decision, one that could potentially affect their entire city, state, their country, they would go to the oracle to ask for the insights that they were believed came from the gods. But the Oracle of Delphi is in this cave complex, and the cave complex where she's situated has a large amount of fumes and vapors coming up from the ground. And so the entire time that she's in there, she is inhaling those cave vapors and fumes. So there is definitely something in the air, something invisible that is like coursing through her, but it's not necessarily the words of the divine so much as it is vaguely hallucinogenic fumes.
And when we start BC like that, and we start sort of with ancient history, you go into Alexander the Great. And I love it. This is, and your writing style, let me just read a little second or two of it, because I really like your style. Alexander the Great wasn't your ordinary teenager. When his dad went out of town on business, he didn't borrow the old man's car or go for a joyride. Instead, he borrowed his dad's soldiers to crush a rebel uprising. When his father was assassinated, he didn't pull a Hamlet and mope around the palace, paralyzed by indecisiveness. He took his army on a road trip and conquered Persia. Now, tell me about Alexander the Great as it related to his indulgence with drugs and drink.
Absolutely. So a big part of Alexander the Great's whole psychology was that he could just never get enough. The guy always wanted more. We certainly saw that with the fact that he conquered half the known world, and the only reason why he turned back after conquering a bunch of India is that his soldiers were tired of it. They were like, we want to go back to Greece. It's been so long. We've just been on the road forever fighting. And so only when his men insisted they turn back did he stop conquering more places. But he would have kept going otherwise. And he had a very similar, in the same way that he thirsted for conquest and to expend land, he had a very big appetite. He had quite the libido. He was fond of, pretty ladies, pretty men. He wasn't super picky. He liked all kinds of stuff, and he loved to party. He liked to drink really heavily, and he liked to do opium. And that's a dangerous combination, but especially when you consider that. So this was a time when there's not any modern refrigeration techniques, right? So a lot of the alcohol that they've got stored at that time, it's not like nowadays where you'll get a bottle that might have like 5 to 12% alcohol by volume in it. No, the unwatered wine, which they kept in, amphorae and casks and stuff like that, that was often as strong as hard liquor is now. And he would just drink that stuff, not out of cups, out of bowls. He would drink bowl after bowl of hard liquor and do a bunch of opium. And this was not very good for someone who is constantly being exposed to tropical diseases, who's taking hits in wartime. So again, it's like he was an incredible warrior. He had never lost a battle. But when you're fighting that much and you are also just punishing your body with that kind of partying, it will basically break down your immune system. And so he died after a night of insane, crazy partying in Nebuchadnezzar's palace in Baghdad. He did so much alcohol and opium that his immune system basically shut down. He lingered for a few days and then died. So the only battle he loses is against his own addictions.
It's, as you say, but no matter how powerful, intelligent, or charismatic he was, Alexander was still a mortal man with a mortal man's liver. Yep. The party lasted all day and all night, and he continued to drink bowl after bowl. Complaining he wasn't feeling well, he announced he was going to bed to recuperate a bit, but his condition steadily deteriorated. He was in tremendous pain. You go on. In the days that followed, his body grew weaker and weaker. After 12 long days of excruciating agony, he was so weak that he could barely move. And you go on to kind of detail what happened. I mean, it really is great. You mix the history with these rich descriptions. One of the great, let me see if I can find it. I loved who is the ancient guy, doggone it. I had this all, the guy who died of mercury poisoning.
Qin Shi Huangdi, the guy who unified China.
And while you tell us about him, I'm going to find it because the way you write about it is absolutely full of whimsy, fun, and then, as I say, detail that I never was aware of. Go ahead.
Of course, absolutely. So Qin Shi Huangdi he is the person who came up with the idea of China as a unified country and then made it happen. So he was the first emperor of a unified China, very powerful man, very brutal. He did not unify China by being nice and friendly. And so this is a guy who he's got a lot of enemies and he's very, very driven. And he decides that he wants to be able to live forever. And so at the time, it was widely believed that Mercury had almost supernatural powers, like it was some kind of amazing ingredient that you could use.
It was the time of alchemy, right? That was where the alchemists kind of they kind of convinced him this is the thing that you can take to live forever. That's what he wanted to do, right? Live forever. Yeah,
he wanted to live forever, and a large part of the reasoning seemed to be that look how cool Mercury is. It's like it's a metal, but it's a liquid. That's awesome. Clearly, this can let you do things that no other human could hope to achieve ordinarily. But obviously, as we now know, Mercury does not have any medical utility like that. It is, in fact, really poisonous. And so his obsession—
Let me interrupt you just to read again. I'm sorry, I'm so crazy about your text, but the alchemist convinced the emperor that these mysterious, inexplicable qualities were proof that Mercury possessed a special power that, if harnessed properly, would serve as the key ingredient in his elixir of life. Again, he wanted to live forever. Bottom line, if he drank precisely the right amount of liquid mercury, he would live forever. Importantly, though, the alchemist didn't want him to drink mercury all by itself because it would taste like crap. No one likes an immortality potion with a lousy aftertaste. So the alchemist took the liberty of adding a few other ingredients to improve the flavor. By ingredients, I mean drugs. Now, please continue.
Yeah, so
he's slowly poisoning himself, isn't he, Sam?
He pretty much is. What they're giving him is basically like there's some alcohol in there, various herbs, including probably cannabis and some other stuff. But the active ingredient they're giving him is mercury, which is, of course, insanely poisonous. So not only does he end up dying from mercury poisoning, but he was also so obsessed with mercury in general that he also had his very, very elaborate tomb, which, as you know, contains those terracotta warriors. A large part of his tomb still cannot be opened up because he thought it would be fun to have like water features in his tomb, but with mercury. And so the amount of mercury fumes in there is so extraordinary that if they open the main chamber, it would probably cause a mass fatality event over the surrounding countryside.
And as you suggest, you've got to appreciate the irony, right? Here was a guy who was constantly being targeted for death by skilled assassins, yet in the end, he wasn't killed by his enemies. He was worshipped him and wanted him to live forever. It is insanely ironic.
Yeah, and what's even wilder, too, is that after he dies from the mercury-based alchemy elixir poisoning, a bunch of other high-ranking Chinese officials in history after that proceed to die from very similar mercury-based alchemy elixirs. When I was doing the research for this, I found that there was an entire Wikipedia page of list of people who have died from Chinese alchemical elixir poisoning.
All right, so get me to some people whose names people will truly recognize. George Washington, the father of the country, etc. Tell me about his drug abuse and his search for elixirs that would help his mind kind of escape.
Well, I wouldn't say it was Washington's abuse per se, more like Washington had a weird, so you notice how in all the pictures of Washington, all the renderings of him, he is never smiling. He always has his mouth shut. He always looks really uncomfortable, and it looks almost like his teeth don't fit inside his mouth. That's because all of that is true. So the myth we often hear is that Washington had wooden teeth. He wishes he had wooden teeth. That would have been so much better than what he had. His very primitive dentures were these Frankenstein abominations that were made of, so there were teeth taken from corpses, there were teeth taken from enslaved people who he owned, and some of them were animal teeth, and they were all crudely wired together and then attached to his mouth via, yeah, there we go. These nasty, nasty primitive dentures. They were attached to the one remaining tooth he actually had in his mouth. And these things were brutal. These, as you can see, these barely fit into a human mouth. And so he needed to be taking opium to deal with the pain of having these dentures. And you might wonder, why bother having such painful dentures at all? And of course, the answer is, without having teeth, you can't really talk properly. And if he's going to lead a country, he has to be able to talk properly. So in order to talk, he needed teeth. And to have teeth, he needed opium because of how horrifying putting the teeth into his mouth and keeping there was.
Was there evidence in your research that Washington was high on opium at times when he was making critical decisions about the country?
I don't get the sense that his decision making was heavily influenced by his opium use. There were definitely some people whose drug use clearly heavily influenced their judgment. And with Washington, I got the sense that it didn't majorly influence his judgment, but it was a big, like a daily part of his life that most people never even think about. And that's why I wanted to bring it forward, because a lot of these, there's a big spectrum in terms of how much the drug use kind of plays a role in people's lives, whether it's some of them, the drug use completely takes over their lives, and others, they're basically using it as that was the most advanced medicine they had at the time.
Sure, it's a palliative of sorts, right? And yeah, you're so right. I mean, you detail drug use, but not always drug abuse, or you know, to make the distinction kind of that way.
The evidence seems to indicate that that very much unlike Alexander the Great, George Washington was not a drug abuser per se.
You talk about Andrew Jackson, and you know, I think he's a loathsome figure in American history, and the fact that he was effed up a lot of the time doesn't surprise me. Can you tell us about him?
Oh yeah, well, so Andrew Jackson was it's crazy that his like insane, violent, belligerent drinking was really just part of this giant constellation of awfulness, really. So because. But really, it's interesting how his drinking seemed to kind of make him more himself, because Jackson was a slave owner, right? And so he has this big plantation. He grows a bunch of grain. And so on his plantation, he's got his own distillery for the grain that he is growing using slavery. And he is making his own whiskey, and he is drinking that and selling that. And the whiskey becomes very closely associated with Andrew Jackson. It encourages him to be even more fight happy, to be even quicker to respond to any perceived insults. And of course, it makes him money, and it gets people like it when they get free booze. So this is how he got his big user base of poor white folks who supported him and were the biggest driving factor was, yeah, Andrew Jackson would give out free booze at his political events to people who would vote for him. So they would just turn into these gigantic drunken bacchanalia to the point where he actually had a party at the White House that he had to ultimately escape out a window because of how crazily drunk people got there. But they managed to pull the guests outside because he filled literal bathtubs full of whiskey, but put them outside to get the people to leave the house so they would drink out there and not inside.
One of the wild things about Andrew Jackson that you do note in your book is that, you know, he was a brutal, just sort of jihadist against native people. So, you know, and I mean, it's just, it's horrifying. It's one of the most horrifying chapters of American history. And the chapters of American history. And the irony, given what you just said and his love of drink and how he felt it was so great, is the one group he wanted to keep. Isn't that right? I mean, and I also say it's ironic because, as you know, the indigenous peoples of America have been plagued by alcohol abuse on reservations, et cetera. So that was kind of a weird wrinkle in it all, you know?
Yeah. So definitely there were people whose goal was to dispossess the indigenous people, who took the effort of alcohol will weaken their societies. And so this is a way to undermine them from within. So certainly there were people who would deliberately try and say, oh, well, these native people have goods we want to trade for. What will we give them in return? We'll give them alcohol and guns. And so Andrew Jackson was less in that. He took a much more hands-on, less indirect approach to brutality.
Right.
He was much more in favor of, he's like, no, we're not going to trade the alcohol to them. I'm going to drink the alcohol, and then I'm going to go and engage in acts of extreme violence. So that was pretty much a big part of his whole MO. He would do insane, violent stuff, and then dare anyone to challenge him. And who wanted to challenge someone that crazy?
Human history on drugs. You talk about Queen Victoria too. In fact, the chapter is titled "Queen Victoria was the biggest drug dealer of all time."
Well, yeah. It's certainly. You think about it. Britain fought 2 opium wars against China in order to get there. Like at its peak, opium sales were making up 10 to 15% of the entire revenue of the British Empire, like worldwide. And so certainly Queen Victoria was the queen pin of this strategy. It was her idea that they could grow large amounts of opium in India. And at this point, it was already known in Britain that opium was addictive like that, because they'd passed some laws like that to prevent British people from getting hooked on opium. But she realized that they could sell this to China. They could flip the balance of trade. So instead of Britain giving tons of money to China and getting very little in return, all of a sudden they could get the beneficial trade balance by selling them tons of drugs. And when the Chinese tried to stop that because it was turning massive parts of the population into addicts, she went to war with them. And so not only was she a big drug kingpin in terms of global production and distribution of opium in order to fulfill political ends, but she also did like drugs herself, although she personally was not much of an opium person. She preferred cocaine, often in the form of cocaine-infused chewing gum, cocaine wine. There were a lot of products back then that had cocaine infused to them.
Right. The cocaine thing is a part of your book in a big way.
Yes.
Cocaine entered the scene more or less in a high profile, the way that you were able to track it. When did it sort of ebb as an additive?
Okay, so cocaine obviously is derived from the coca leaf, and so coca leaves in South America and parts of South America have a very long traditional history there. So that's been being done since time immemorial. And so coca leaves are maybe like 5% most cocaine by volume. So most people who chew coca leaves, they just get, it staves off altitude sickness, somewhat reduces their appetite, but doesn't really give them cocaine effects. So in the 19th century, Europeans find these plants and they decide that they're going to really study them and extract this stuff. And so they managed to get very high concentration cocaine that was never previously available before. And this stuff becomes super popular in Europe as a wonder drug and a medical curiosity. So through most of the 19th century, there are no limitations on cocaine, and those only really come in the early 20th century. But up until that point, cocaine is so popular that it is one of the people in my book is a pope. He is Pope Leo XIII. And as you know, the current pope is Pope Leo XIV. So the current pope is named after this guy who's in my book. And this guy, he was pope like starting in his late 70s and into his 90s. And of like 300 encyclicals in the history of the Catholic Church, he wrote 80 of them. He is this incredibly prolific theologian. And he says that he uses cocaine wine, quote, to fortify myself when prayer is insufficient. He loves the cocaine wine so much, he gives a Vatican gold medal to the creator of the cocaine wine and appears in a full-page advertisement for the cocaine wine that is reproduced in my book.
Oh, gosh, it's just so funny. It really is the papal love of cocaine wine. You just think you'd never see it. So Vincent van Gogh is a fascinating figure in history because we all sort of feel we know a little bit about his madness, and how it was taking over his. But I didn't realize the degree to which he was into other drugs. But and then your book exposes no, he was into one huge thing beyond just the madness and the drugs. One thing that was really diminishing his ability to survive with mental clarity and also maybe to survive, period, physically.
Oh yeah, so
he was eating yellow paint, wasn't he, Sam?
Yeah, he was eating yellow paint. Well, he was eating other paint too. Yellow paint happened to be his favorite. That was his favorite flavor. And as you might notice in his artwork is full of massive amounts of yellow. He really likes to use it both as an artistic thing and as a thing to ingest. And see, the thing about Van Gogh is he just had a lot of stuff mentally wrong with him to begin with, to the point where, like, I think his substance, because his substance use is so weird, it's ingesting paint, trying to drink turpentine, stuff like that. It seems like that's a pretty clear outgrowth of him being really mentally ill. Because certainly it's the kind of thing that most people wouldn't even, it would not occur to them. He likely had a condition called pica, which is a condition that makes people really want to eat non-food objects. It's generally considered to be a mental disorder because you can't digest those things, and a lot of them are poisonous. And certainly what he was consuming was lead-based paint, so it was very much poisonous, and it was only making him even more insane. And so it was really just a kind of a vicious cycle where, because he's mentally unstable and has access to tons of paint, he starts eating some of the paint, which makes him more mentally unstable and more likely to do insane things. So it's like having him go into a psychotic.
I mean, he was yeah.
Having him go into psychotic fury of rage and cutting his ear off is perhaps less surprising when you realize all the terrifyingly insane stuff that he was compelled to do by his mental illness before that. Again, I believe one of his roommates had to prevent him from drinking an entire bottle of turpentine.
Yeah, I mean, and you realize that he's on these psychotic breaks. Many of them are brought on by this very thing that is, as you say, it's this kind of a vicious cycle, this cycle of abuse. We talked, and your book goes through all of these luminaries. Again, the invention of LSD is to take everybody through just quickly. Again, these are all things that you detail richly and in this whimsical, fun way. Sam, you're really a gifted writer. I hope you do a lot more in this way. But tell us about the development of LSD.
So yeah, LSD was invented in the 1940s in Switzerland by a chemist named Dr. Albert Hofmann, who he was actually studying ergot fungus. I think you can get it on kinds of bread mold. It's just a fairly commonly occurring type of fungus. But he's messing around with the molecules, and he realizes that there's one that produces kind of a strange effect. It makes you feel kind of odd. And so he doses what he thinks is a very, very small dose. And then he starts heading home. But as it turns out, he'd actually given himself quite a large dose of this novel psychedelic. And so as he's going home on his bicycle, that the world is melting around him and so he realizes that he has created something very strange. And so for 10 years, this stuff, it turns out, has actually great use in the field of psychiatry. And so it gets used as a psychiatric medication with some effects for a while, until there's a double whammy. There is the CIA decides that they want to study mind control, and so they buy up the entire world's supply of pharmaceutical LSD. And meanwhile, a bunch of hippies realize that if you take way larger doses than what the prescription says, you can start to trip out and see some really weird stuff. And so that sort of 1-2, the CIA trying to weaponize it and hippies using it for recreation, ends up getting LSD banned, which its creator was always very upset about, because he genuinely believed, with good reason, that it had tremendous use in dealing with all kinds of conditions, from depression to anxiety and addiction and other things like that. But it all got ignored in favor of, whoa, man, look how trippy it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that wild? I feel like it's swinging back the other way. Now there seem to be more reputable ways to pursue LSD.
No, absolutely. I think that certainly that moral panic set it back decades, but I think now we are seeing a process in which the original purpose of LSD and its uses to actually treat a variety of psychiatric and physical problems, these are now actually being better recognized. And that was, near the end of his life, he wrote a book in which he said, like, LSD has become my problem child, but it's supposed to be my wonder child. And so he's like, I believe it can be the wonder child again if it's given a chance.
Yes, Dr. Frankenstein. So let me, two other things before I let you go. One is JFK, I'll get to in a second, but I'm curious about cannabis and cannabis through time, because I think we trace the origins of cannabis back to the beginnings, and you talk about the pharaoh Ramses, I think, also being on cannabis. Yeah. So can you just speak to cannabis and maybe the pharaoh as well?
Yeah. So cannabis is one of the oldest, the oldest substances that human beings ingest and still use. It's up there with cannabis, opium, alcohol. These are things that probably predate writing. And so in the ancient world, in ancient Egypt, ancient India, ancient China, cannabis was already known to have significant effects on people. And so Ramses the Great, the one who's identified as the pharaoh from the Bible, built all these massive monuments. Well, he didn't personally build them. He had people do it for him, obviously. But, you get the idea. Monument builder, very important pharaoh.
He was more a supervisor.
Yeah, he was, but so he's, since he was the pharaoh, right? He wasn't so much a king as he was considered a god emperor. So he was expected to lead his troops into battle and be their mighty superhuman. Basically, it was like king as superhero. And so he was expected to be this larger than life figure who was unflappable and heroic. But again, it's like you're going to get injured if you're leading your troops into battle. And so one of the ways that he de-stressed and soothed the pain was by using cannabis. And he clearly liked it a lot, because he liked cannabis enough that when they actually found his mummy, they found cannabis pollen and cannabis pollen and powder still inside the mummy, preserved there, and he'd been buried with cannabis as well. Most of the stuff he was buried with did not survive the ages and water getting in, but the stuff in his mummy, they still found that cannabis pollen there after all the years.
All right. Round it off with JFK, and then I'll give you a big plug again for the book, which is just so much fun and fascinating. What JFK, it was understood that he was dealing with back pain and different kinds of things, but you go into it in some detail.
Yeah, I mean, JFK had a lot of medical problems. And it certainly, he was already somewhat like sickly as a boy, and then developed more medical problems as he aged. And his father was a notoriously tough guy, but his father had been training his older son to be his political successor. His older brother was supposed to be the one who went into politics and attained the heights of the echelon and all that stuff. But then he died in World War II, and so JFK becomes he was the guy on deck for his father's political aspirations for him. So they had the problem of, okay, this guy has a bunch of different medical problems. He's been injured, has like congenital stuff, has stuff that's just kind of there. And we need to make it seem as though he is the image of hail, hearty, all-American health. And what they end up doing is just injecting him with drugs, giving him pills, all kinds of stuff. He ends up getting this sketchy celebrity doctor who's giving him like weird injections of, I want to say, hormones taken from animal glands and amphetamines and stuff like that. And I think at some point he says, look, I don't care if it's horse piss. If it works, it works. So he did a lot of stuff to mask the fact that he was in almost constant pain and had a bunch of fatigue-related issues.
Wild, absolutely wild. And you know, you go through so many figures in history and so many key moments in history and so many events in history, and then you wonder if history is informed by some kind of presence of drugs or hallucinogens or these palliatives or whatever you want to call them. And the answer is probably quite a few.
Oh yeah, no, certainly in the periods where his judgment maybe wasn't the best, like Bay of Pigs type stuff, there's a lot of speculation as well as the fact that we're having to dope him up on tons of different medications. Is that making his judgment worse? And I feel like it's hard to say yes or no, but I feel like it doesn't help.
Yeah. So you're on TikTok in a big way, and you are popular there for quirky historical drug stories as well. So you can find Sam Kelly there. He's the author of Human History. In fact, I can post it here, but for those who are just listening and who haven't, not the benefit, on Instagram, it is at human_history_on_drugs. At human_history_on_drugs. And then on TikTok, you can find Sam at human_history_on_DURGS. Instead of drugs, it's spelled DURGS, right?
Yeah, TikTok has a special little, I'm not sure exactly what defines their censorship rules, but I think their idea is if you can spell drugs correctly, that will somehow make it more likely that they are sold. Like, it's like, couldn't you just misspell drugs and then have someone selling the misspelled drugs? But sure. I don't know. Like,
look, you're popular there.
Selling off their platform.
You can't fight City Hall, as they say.
Yeah.
Look, so City Hall, as they say. Look, so happy that you joined us. So many great. I was just reading. Human History on Drugs brings famous historical figures and eras to life in a way we've never seen them before. You'll never look at history the same way again. You'll never look at history the same way again. That's from Harlan Coben, the #1 New York Times bestselling author. And congratulations, my friend. I wish you all the best, continued success. Come back anytime, and we'll talk about more major historical figures who've been effed up as they've done stuff. All right, all the best, Sam.
Thank you so much.
All right, Sam Kelly, everybody. Right on.
The Mark Thompson Show.
It was great. I loved it.
How would you handle this? We could try ignoring it, sir.
Morning.
You cannot say you love your country.
Where are my weed smokers at?
Stay at home and get baked.
It is the Mark Thompson Show. Hey, Tony, we're here to close it out. Let's get the music on. I wanted to answer a question from Lorena Rose, who asks, so what is the status of the bill in the Senate? The marathon voting, the vote-a-rama, is underway right now in the Senate. There are 2 Republicans opposed. Senator Tillis is talking about Medicaid cuts. And of course, that's not popular among the GOP. They don't want to talk about that, but the voting is underway. So that is the current status. Tomorrow, we've got a great show lined up for you, including Nathan Taylor, who pops in to talk about the latest voting investigations. Mark Talks Politics with David K. Johnston, back from vacation. He will be here. And it is Tech Tuesday with Jefferson Graham. That is all tomorrow on The Mark Thompson Show. Thank you to everyone who's contributed to the show today. Crowdfunded show, so we really appreciate all of your help. And Tony and I will be back here tomorrow. As for
I'm
now,
Shadow Stevens for the Mark Thompson Show. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Link for the after party be in chat.
After Party Live is next. Subscribe. Thank you.
See you.